For those of you who feel you can't fully run towards olderhood because you're suffering through chronic pain, we haven't forgotten you. Help is on the way. Today we're joined by pain scientist Dr. Dan Harvie to discuss the book Pain and Perception, a closer look at why we hurt, which he co-authored with Professor Lorimer Moseley. This book provides an in-depth understanding of pain and perception and why people experience pain differently. Dan and Lorrimer take a closer look at the relationship between pain and the brain, because pain is actually not just a physical sensation, but a complex interplay of physical, psychological, and social factors that affect our perception of pain. Hello and welcome to another episode of Ironing Out the Wrinkles. I'm your host, Ros McMaster.
And hello, I'm your other host, Kate Shaw. Together we're taking the age out of ageism, helping men and women embrace the second stage of life with less fear. Dr. Daniel Harvie is a pain scientist and a lecturer in physiotherapy at the University of South Australia. His research focuses on exploring new approaches to treating persistent pain using virtual reality and sensory training approaches. Daniel also serves on the education and committees for the Australian Pain Society, has an advisory role at an organisation known as More Good Days, who offer pain management programs for those suffering from fibromyalgia. Throughout the book, Harvie and Moseley provide readers with a wealth of scientific evidence to explain how pain perception works and provide practical advice on how to manage pain, including tips on mindfulness and techniques to reframe our thoughts about pain. That will be a big relief to many of you. Pain and Perception, a closer look at why we hurt, has been described as the most thought-provoking and insightful book that provides a compelling argument for a more holistic and patient-centered approach to pain management.
Dan, hello and welcome. We are so excited to be talking with you today.
Yes, we are.
Hi, Ros. Hi, Kate. Very happy to be here. And congrats on the podcast. I have to say up front, I love the name, Ironing Out the Wrinkles. And I think one very interesting thing about wrinkles that I often talk about when I'm talking to people in pain is that wrinkles don't hurt. And freckles and moles don't hurt.
No, they don't.
And often I think what we see when we look inside people's bodies on X-rays and MRIs is just wrinkles, normal age-related changes. And I often say to people, if wrinkles on the outside don't hurt, then those wrinkles on the inside don't necessarily have to hurt either.
Oh, that's a really nice way to put it.
It is. Yeah.
But it's, I'm not a person who experiences a lot of pain myself. So I don't have any negative perceptions about pain. But I do know there's more than 3 million Australians living with chronic pain currently. And that's just in Australia. So factoring in societal costs and the loss of productivity, it's actually, I'm a person who loves statistics. It's estimated that the annual cost of pain will be around 215.6 billion by 2050. So your research is pivotal in finding a solution that's going to bring relief on all levels. But I'm particularly fascinated too by virtual reality aspects of healing that's being used in so many facets of our existence now, including pain relief. So I hope we've got some time to talk about the virtual reality aspect of healing and looking at
pain can destroy your life, can't it, really?
Yeah. But for now, I've done enough talking. What inspired you, Dan, to write this book? What did you hope to achieve with it?
I guess the inspiration came from a couple of places. The first was as a young physiotherapist, I grew up fascinated by the science of pain, and I've followed Lorimer Moseley for a long time and his pain research. And of course, he later became my PhD supervisor. And one thing I noticed in his presentations, he almost always included an illusion in his presentations. And to me, that always showed that all of our sensory experiences, whether it's, because you sometimes use a visual illusion or an auditory illusion, all of our sensory experiences are actually more complex than they appear to be. And they depend not just on the things that we think that they depend on. And I always just thought that was a beautiful segue into talking about pain, because if we can highlight the complexity of our sensory experience through an illusion, then I certainly feel more open, and I think other people do as well, to thinking about pain also as complex and depending on many different things. So I guess that was the first thing. The second was a number of years ago, Lorimer invited me to help with an initiative called the Pain Revolution, which is trying to change the way Australians think about pain. And part of this includes an annual rural outreach tour. And as part of that, we give public seminars about pain. And for the last 3 years, I've been the captain of something we call the Brain Bus.
Yeah, I read that.
And yeah,
Kate's been excited about talking about that.
Right, yeah, so I was happy to talk about that. And so that's a mobile pain science lab, and we set up in communities, and we have all kinds of illusions there that people can get hands-on with. And we use those illusions to talk about how complex our perception is and some of the different things that influence our visual perception, our auditory perception, all different things. And we use that to start a conversation about thinking differently about pain. So a couple of years ago, I was thinking, I mightn't be in this role forever. I want to pass on what we've learned about how to use illusions to talk differently about pain. And so I put that together in what I called a Brain Bus manual. And I thought, oh man, we should make this much more broadly available than just something we give to other people who are going to be working as part of the Brain Bus team. And so I approached Noi Group, and they loved the idea. And so Lorimer and I and Noi Group worked it into a book.
I love the illustrations in the book too. They're really good too.
Yeah. That's what makes it, like, I'm a person that I need that kind of stimulus to help me understand the visual cues. So the illustrations in the book are really fabulous.
Great. Yes.
Yeah, we worked really quite hard with a digital artist, Juan Piestracon, on that. And he's got a background in special effects and technology and artistry. And so he really understood how illusions work and the different elements that come together to create an illusion. So yeah, he was a really important part of the team of putting that.
That's great.
Together.
But before
and
we
always wanted it to be a beautiful
book,
beautiful. A coffee table book. Yeah.
And it works. It works, and it's very affordable too. It's a brilliant book. But before we go any further, do you mind if we actually give us a definition of what chronic pain is? Is it when a pain persists after an injury, or what is it?
Yeah, so it's a very arbitrary definition that we work with at the moment. It's simply pain that has persisted longer than 3 months. So it's arbitrary in the sense that it doesn't actually tell you what the causes are. But we do assume a couple of things in that timeline. One is that injury healing has taken place across that time. You can't stop injury healing. It's a process that occurs on its own. And so we assume that beyond 3 months, the tissues are probably in a pretty good state. They're always changing and they can always improve. But we assume that other factors beyond the tissues must be playing a role in maintaining pain beyond that time frame. So that's sort of why we use that 3-month cutoff.
Okay. So how has the traditional view of pain impacted pain management and treatment over the years? Has it changed a lot?
Yeah, well, I guess there we have to define what the traditional view is. And I guess that the traditional view in a nutshell is that pain is something of a signal that comes from the body and is simply received by the brain. The brain just reads out an impulse that's coming from the body. that narrow view of pain has sort of narrowed our focus on what are the causes of pain and what must be the treatments. And it's narrowed those treatments really to focusing only on the tissues at the site of pain. And they, of course, can be really important and are always some component of a cause and a management plan. But thinking that way has sort of meant that everything above the neck hasn't been included in our understanding of pain. And of course, we now know that the causes of pain are much broader than just what's going on in the tissues.
Yeah, so that's a nice segue actually into the next question, which is the role of the brain in pain, in pain perception specifically, and how it differs from the traditional view of pain. So this is your area, isn't it? So let's talk about the brain in pain perception.
Yeah, so I guess we've just covered what the role of the brain isn't, and that's that it's not something that simply receives information. We can divide its role up in a number of ways, and I think the first of those roles, at least in how I think about it, is that it's the thing that gathers information. And so it gathers information from the body, it gathers information from our other senses, and it also gathers information from itself, which sounds a bit weird, but the brain stores information about the body. It stores information about what it knows about the causes of pain and what happened to your friends when they had pain. It stores information about what it read on an X-ray scan and what the doctor told you. And so I think that's the first component of what the brain does, is it puts all of that information together. So a word I attach to that is it's an integrator of information. At that point of integration, you still haven't felt anything. So that's something I think about as happening down the track in this process. So let's call that the integrating component. The next component that I think about is that it determines the meaning of what all that information means. So you could think about it there as the assessor of all of that information. So it determines what, on the basis of all that information, what's the meaning of this sensory input or this situation. And then the final thing is it's the thing that actually generates our feelings, our conscious experience. So that we can think about it as the generator. So the integrator, the assessor, and the generator of our experience.
That reminds me of what I read. You quoted this review in the British Medical Journal about the builder whom you called Bob. And Bob actually jumped from a high level onto a 15-centimetre nail, and he was writhing in agony, and he needed to have, because it had gone right through his boot, he thought, and he had to have strong medication. He couldn't when every time he moved. And when they removed the boot, it was a miracle. His foot was perfect. The actual nail had gone between his toes, but his pain was real. That was fascinating to me. It's almost like auto-suggestion, isn't it, from the brain?
Yeah, I love this story. It's kind of an extreme case, but I think sometimes the extreme cases tell us a lot about what's happening even in ordinary pain situations. And I think with how we understand pain now, it actually makes perfect sense to me that he was in pain, because everything that he was seeing suggested that he should have pain. And even that pain would be a good protective response in that scenario. And actually, we told this story on a Pain Revolution tour once, and at the end of the talk, someone in the audience put up their hand, and they said a very similar thing happened to me when he was chopping wood, but he missed the block of wood, and he put the axe between into his steel cap boot. And he said he was also in agony, but took his boot off. And this time it was the axe that had gone between his toes and not caused any tissue damage at all. But I think what the story does, it invites us to think about or to view those, in this case, the visual signals that the body was in danger or damaged, as a really important cue that the brain was paying attention to in determining whether your body was in trouble and whether pain, some kind of alarm system, would be a useful response. And then the invitation from there is to think about what else could be signals to the brain as it's integrating information. What could be some of those other signals that might indicate to the brain that our body is in trouble in some way, leading the brain to assess that we're in danger, and in response to that, to give us pain as a kind of protective response.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, even I've observed with my own granddaughter, if she falls over, she'll get up and she'll be fine. But if my response is too quickly one to go, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" and have a worried look on my face, she'll look at me and you can tell she's thinking, "Oh, that should have hurt me." And then she'll start crying. So she'll be happy enough until she gauges my response. And then her perception of what just happened is, "Oh, I'm supposed to be hurting.
It's true,
I
I've
better
seen that.
cry."
Yes.
So it's quite funny. So how do our beliefs and expectations impact our experience of pain, and what can we do to change these beliefs?
It's a really big question and a complex one. The example you gave is a beautiful one. And I think kids in a way are still learning to process sensory information. And one of the things the brain does is it also weighs up the importance of information from different sources. And you could imagine, to a child, information from the body might be really important, but information from a parent might be equally or maybe even more important in the brain weighing up whether there's danger in a given situation. So it might be that we're seeing there something that still happens in adults, but in a more powerful way in a child. I thought what I might try to do here, we'll have to see if it works, but I thought in answering this question, I might actually try to play an auditory illusion, and we'll
Love
see if we
that.
can deconstruct it a little bit and then extrapolate from there to pain. So I'm going to play it into the microphone from my phone. Hopefully it comes across okay.
That's exciting. I was going to ask you to give an example of an illusion.
Yeah, all right, let's see how it goes. I'm going to turn my volume up here too. All right, did you hear something there?
Yes.
So I play it again. Likely you won't be able to interpret what it says. That part is coming next. I'll do it again, see if you can see what it says.
I can understand that. Anxiety is an illusion.
Well
Okay.
done. I had
Love
no
that.
idea.
Okay,
Is that
love
true?
that. Love that. It's actually not true, but I love it. I love that you heard something in that. Any other guesses?
I'm very creative.
No
with it.
idea. That was talking underwater.
Okay, now I'm going to give you some extra information and then see how the sound of it changes in response to that. So this time what you're going to hear is same sound, different perception. All right, same sound, different perception.
Oh, something is an illusion. Well,
Was it-
that could have been
yeah.
anxiety, since Kate said
Yeah.
that. Anxiety is an illusion.
I'll do it one more time. Actually, what
That's wrong.
I'm telling you what it says is same sound, different perception.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what it actually says.
That's what it actually
Oh.
says. Yep.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Yep. Go again.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
When you said that earlier, I thought you were telling us about something that was going to happen
yeah.
with the sound, but you were telling us what it was saying.
Yes.
Well, I heard it then.
Yes. So it only works if you actually think that that's what's coming. there. And I can provide some links to some similar sorts of illusions. This is just
That's
one
great.
that we knocked up ourselves. But what's being represented here is that the information we get through our senses is always kind of messy. And that should have come across initially when all you heard initially was either nothing or you actually heard the wrong thing. And even though our sensory information is kind of messy, it's our brain's job to try to interpret it and make the best sense that it can. And one of the things that our brain uses to make sense is what it already knows from past experience and from its expectations. And so when I tell you to expect that what you're going to hear is same sound, different perception, what tends to happen is that that's what you hear. And it might come across a little bit more distorted in the microphone, but typically, once I give that information, people hear it so clearly that they wonder how they ever didn't hear that in the first place. And it's just because our perceptions are so heavily dependent on what the brain is expecting and the information that it already has.
Yeah, it's so interesting because our next question was about emotions such as anxiety and depression impacting pain perception. That was actually the next question. So you pretty much covered that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's also a lovely topic. And we do see a lot of overlap between people who suffer from anxiety and depression and people who also have persistent pain. And so for a long time already, that's given us clues that there might be something about one that compounds the other. And the obvious thing there is that having persistent pain is going to be stressful, and that in itself can promote depression. But we do know the relationship can also go the other way, and sometimes anxiety and depression also precedes having persistent pain. And there's a couple of ways that we think that they relate, and one is that stress and depression are associated with physiological responses, stress-related responses. And our stress hormones, for example, interact with our body tissues and our immune system and our nervous system in ways that can turn up our sensitivity. So that's basically how we see this overlap between the two. And that can be helpful to know because it can mean that tackling your mental health as a legitimate strategy for helping to improve chronic pain can be elevated, I guess, rather than just seeing it as something that's secondary, but instead seeing it as something that is really part, rather than just separating mental health and physical health. We now understand some of the science that shows those things are really integrated and overlap in terms of their causes and mechanisms.
Yeah, because if you're feeling unwell, you become, we'll see, even depressed, you become very sensitive to light, to noise. You tend to want to lock yourself in rooms and, sit in the dark and what have you. I'm just guessing that. I don't suffer from depression myself. But even people with anxiety, does that come into what I also wanted you to talk about was the concept of catastrophizing. And because people with anxiety tend to catastrophize, don't they? So is that the link there on your impact on pain perception?
Yeah. I think we can all be guilty of catastrophizing at times.
Like, have I got COVID?
Oh yeah, I think we've all been through that phase and hopefully out the other side. I think the first thing to acknowledge here is that catastrophizing is kind of a jargon term that's sort of come out of the research space, and I'm always cautious about talking about using that word with people in pain because no one wants to be told that they're a catastrophizer. But simply, what it is the tendency that we have sometimes to overinterpret the negative meaning of a of a situation. And in the pain science world, we have this beautiful model called the fear avoidance model, which again is kind of a jargon term, but it's worth explaining because what it suggests is that, broadly speaking, there are two pathways people go on after an episode of pain or injury. One is a pathway towards recovery, and one is a pathway towards persistent pain. And what the model suggests is that whether you go on one pathway or the other largely depends on how you interpret it. And it suggests that if you interpret your pain or injury in a really worrying way, to use the term a catastrophic way, that means a way that starts thinking, oh, maybe I'll never get better. It's pushing on the nerve. The best thing I can do is just not move, and maybe you hold yourself rigid, and maybe you go to bed for 2 days, or you stop doing things, you become less active, you lose physical fitness, maybe you stop going to work so much or engaging with your friends, and then you get depressed, and you end up on this cycle that can be traced back simply to how you interpreted the problem.
It's true.
And
it's
this
such
is a
a
model
challenge.
you can apply to lots of things.
Well, it is. But I mean, I can imagine it's such a challenge for people who are living with severe 24/7 pain to not think any other way except there's no way out of this. How am I going to get out of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And pain makes you feel like you're falling to pieces. Doesn't it? It's sort of intuitive. So I never hold it against people to have these almost automatic thoughts about what's happening to you. But I should just finish that model because, of course, the other side is the interpretation that's more like, I can get through this. Pain is temporary. I just need to keep moving. I just need to get the right advice and gradually step forwards through it. So that's one pathway is called the avoiding pathway, and the other is the confronting pathway. Which is
I can make sense of that. As a counsellor, I know when a client would come and they might have had a food intolerance, and it sort of, they believed it took the pleasure out of going out to dine, and dining such a social part of our lives. So they would come and they would say, well, I just don't want to have this eating difficulty. So, but you do have it, so let's find a way to deal with it. But as long as they were saying, well, I just don't want it, it's, they weren't sort of doing anything to change their perception of it and find a solution. But it's, can you discuss with us the relationship between pain and physical activity and the importance of exercise in pain management? Let's kind of move into some practical ways to deal with it for anyone listening who is in chronic pain.
And before you answer that, can I also ask you, I was quite intrigued, and that actually is a good segue into the question Ros asked, I think. In your book, you actually mentioned that we all have a drug cabinet in our brain, but even a shark attack can be pain-free. So I'd love to hear more about all this.
Well, I mean, the shark attack stories are kind of proof that the drug cabinet in the brain is more powerful than anything we have in the pharmacy. That we can have an arm bitten off by a shark or blown off in a battle, and have these stories come back of people who say, all I felt was pressure, I didn't feel any pain. Proves that our brain can flood our system with analgesic compounds. And in actual fact, these are always in balance. They're always present. And part of the reason pain can persist is that the normal levels of these compounds in our system get turned down as part of a protective response. After an injury, our brain wants to make us more sensitive, and so it stops releasing so those compounds. But they're also, and this is I think where we're going here, there are also things we can do that help bolster those natural pain inhibiting compounds in our system, and exercise is certainly one of those. I don't want anyone to switch off now that we're talking about exercise. So I'd also like to acknowledge that for some people, exercise is a dirty word. And in our pain education community, we often avoid that term and just talk about movement, because movement doesn't always necessarily have to mean putting on your joggers or pumping iron in the gym. And for different people at different stages, movement can look very different. One of the things I like to think about when I'm encouraging people to move more is to think about the body as a garden. And if you want your garden to look great and produce fruit in 6 months or a year's time, then you need to weed it, you need to water it, it needs nutrients, it needs sunlight. And you do those things now, but in all likelihood, you won't see benefits from those things, from doing those things in the short term. So I think this is where I like people to think about what's the long-term plan. Certainly to think about what are short-term strategies that can help you cope now. But if that's all you're doing, then you're not tending to your garden. And your garden's not going to produce fruit in 6 months or a year's time. And some sort of movement has to be part of a plan to improve the state of your body, your nervous system, even your mental health. So many different benefits of exercise. And linking back to the drug coming in the brain sort of idea, if you could bottle the benefits of exercise into a drug, we'd all be taking it, because it's across every system. It can help with mental health. It helps with the physical conditioning and our strength and our ability to function. If you apply it in the right way, it can be helpful in desensitizing our nervous system as well. And this is where we're from coaching people to be clever about movement and understand principles of pacing and how to grade activity. Because also some of the tricky situations people encounter as they start to move more is they get these flare-ups. And then the natural response to a flare-up is that you rest and recover. And I call it a boom-bust cycle, because you do more, but you bust. And then you end up having to rest to recover, and then you end up less fit again. So, it's not just a matter of you need to exercise or you need to move. You also need to do it gradually and in the right way, that you get the benefits without flaring yourself up all the time, because that is not fun and actually not helpful.
I've actually heard something, this is probably funny, but I've got a wonderful father who's an academic. He's in his 90s now, and he's always researching. And he said that he's been reading that if you actually use your brain, if you're not able to actually physically exercise, you can pretend that you're jogging or walking, and you actually get similar benefits for your body. Like you just play a little reel in your mind. Is that true?
I don't know about equivalent benefits for your body, but when you think about moving, your brain activates in a similar way to as if you are actually moving. So athletes will use this to rehearse skills. You can see it when you look at like people who are going to dive. You can almost see them mentally rehearsing the sequence of movement, and they'll execute that movement better because they've rehearsed it, because their brain's actually going over the sequences. This idea we use mostly for people who have phantom limb pain, or they've had a spinal cord injury and they can't use their legs anymore. So we and some other research groups have been making software that allows, for example, people put on a virtual reality headset and they swing their arms, and the arms trigger corresponding leg movement.
Wow.
So that people who are paraplegics will look down and their virtual legs, which are right beneath them where their real legs are walking, and they're moving through the space. So they get a real feeling that they're actually walking, and the motor movement parts of their brain are activating similarly to how they would if they were really walking. And the data we have at the moment suggests that those people get pain relief from doing that as well.
Oh,
It's
so
a
I mean,
similar
this,
thing.
yeah,
It's
this
exciting.
virtual reality stuff to do with many aspects of life. It's sort of those technologies that are coming in our future. We're a little bit afraid of them, but the benefits in psychology and health, and oh my gosh, it's incredible. What other ways is the virtual reality used in pain management?
So there's a number of ways we're exploring. So there's the way I just described, really. We're also doing a similar thing with phantom limb pain. So people can move their stump and have their virtual hand or leg move in response to that. I've been having people who've had back pain, have been debilitated by back pain for a long time and feel weak and vulnerable, becoming superheroes in virtual reality. So literally becoming the Incredible Hulk and rock climbers and things. So they get to embody these super strong, super capable characters, which is very different to how they normally feel. And we find when they do that, they do immediately feel stronger and more agile. And some of them also have a pain relieving effect from that as well. So that's kind of exciting.
Is it sustainable?
We don't know yet. We don't have enough data on that. I've published a case report on one guy who seemed to really benefit from that in the long term. It also encouraged him to start doing these more physically active things in the real world. So it was also a stepping stone for him to regain confidence in his body.
Yeah,
he was doing a
the
lot
effect psychologically is enormous, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, pulling you out of the depression and that catastrophizing and what have you, so that you have
helplessness.
so that you have the emotional strength to want to keep doing it then.
Yeah.
Is that available online to read? Sorry, can we all get a hold of that online?
Yep. I'm very happy to link to that.
Oh, that'd be excellent. I'd love to read that. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's one exciting thing. We're also working with a company called Reality Health, who've developed pain education modules in virtual reality. So this is another way to learn about this modern way of understanding pain in a really engaging, interactive way in virtual reality. So yeah, that's kind of exciting as well. And there's lots of potential ways we can use this new technology, and we're just mostly at the beginning of exploring some of those and working out, well, what sort of person, what sort of pain conditions benefit from different types of applications.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
So how can mindfulness and other psychological techniques help manage pain?
A number of ways. I guess what I first say here is I'm not a psychologist, but I am someone who's really advocating for what we now call psychologically informed practice, because we want psychological strategies to not just be the domain of psychologists, because a lot of people just won't get there. And so we need all health professionals within their expertise and scope of practice to be aware of these sort of strategies as well. Of course, if someone has serious psychological issues or history of trauma, these sort of things, they definitely need psychologists. And to be frank, everyone can benefit from having a psychologist in their corner. But my expertise are mostly in what are psychologists doing that we can borrow or encourage people towards. But the why here is that we're not separate psychological and physical beings. Our physiology is really linked. And so when we improve our mental health, we also improve our physical health. And some of the strategies that I've been involved in promoting to disciplines like physio is things like exposure therapy. It's like working out, what are you worried about doing, and challenging, do you need to be worried about that? And then using our skills as therapists to help people understand what it's justified for them to worry about, and what activities and things they might be avoiding because they're worried about doing more damage, but they're actually not going to do more damage. We also think about education as a psychological strategy, because if people are worried that they're falling to pieces, then that has flow-on effects to their mental health. Mindfulness is something we can all promote. And I just love the philosophy of mindfulness. I'm not a great meditator, and I also find that people in pain often find it very difficult to meditate, because you get into this more relaxed state and pain tends to pull you away. But what I love mindfulness, or the philosophy of mindfulness, is it promotes a state of being in the present. And I think so much of our worries come from thinking about the past or worrying about the future. If our attention is just on the here and now, then that's just such a less stressful place to be. And I think mindfulness as a meditation strategy is one way we can practice being in the here and now. And the other component of mindfulness that I love is the practice of being non-judgmental. It's not having thoughts and feelings and then judging them as right or wrong. It's a way of letting that flow of experience and thoughts and sensations be in a non-judgmental way, because I think we make them worse. We make the stresses worse, and we make pain worse by judging it as right or wrong, trying to fight it, trying to make it go away, which is usually well beyond our control. But having this practice of even being curious about our own feelings. And with pain, sometimes it's noticing it, what shape it is, where exactly is it, where's the center of it, how would I describe it? It's noticing it, but it's not judging it as right or wrong, or something there must be damaged, or that makes me angry, or I shouldn't have done that, or these compounding thoughts tend to be amplifiers. So that's a lovely one. We know a lot of people who have persistent pain have trauma in their past. And that's particularly a group that should really get a good psychologist in their corner.
Yeah, I actually read that emotional trauma such as childhood abuse or neglect can change the way the brain processes pain signals, which lead to an increased sensitivity to pain. And those people often are the ones who suffer from chronic pain as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and the earlier we have these experiences, I think the more profoundly they can shape our nervous system. So, that might be a flag for some people listening, if they can recognize they had trauma in their past and they also have pain. If they haven't worked through some of those things and got some help, then that might be a next step for them, not just in improving their psychological well-being, but as part of a pathway to feeling better physically as well.
Yeah, because I think people, they go to the doctor, they're in pain, and they just want the quick fix, give me a Panadol for my headache, but that's just a temporary solution. It's not going to the source of the pain and healing that, which can go all the way back to childhood. What you would, like you were saying, past experiences can have an impact on your perception of pain. So we need to get to the root cause, because all these medications, and so many people are dependent on them, and yet they're having other side effects from the medications, aren't they? Their medications causing all sorts of damage. So we really need to, if you're in pain and you're in chronic pain, you need to invest some time in really getting to the source of why you're perceiving pain a particular way, and that's that takes an effort. Yeah.
It does, yeah. And I
Wonderful
never
too.
want people to feel guilty about
Comfortable.
taking pain medications, but I think people need to have a plan for how they're going to use them, and maybe even for how long, and to use them to make the longer term strategies easier. You know, timing pain relief with some movement or some meditation, and using them to move forward.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I fully appreciate what you were saying about the mindfulness meditation. I've been to 2 10-day silent meditation retreats now at the Vipassana meditation centers, and that's their whole philosophy. Like, you're sitting there, you're not supposed to move, 12 hours a day for 10 days, only breaking
Wow.
for meals. And so you're experiencing a lot of pain in your body, anything that you haven't dealt with, you know, that's emotional pain and trauma, that all comes up, and you have to learn to just be very neutral about it, not see the good bits as not becoming dependent on the positive good bits, and not seeing and judging the bad bits as being negative. So learning how to be very neutral and detach from your judgment, and it's fascinating. It really works. It really works.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
that's
if I could
great.
do
And
that.
do you agree that that's a state that you can bring with you even when you're not meditating?
Oh, to every part of your life, every
Mm,
day. It's wonderful. But even I know when my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, he was so afraid that it would end up going to his bones. I mean, he's
mm,
way outlived his prognosis, and he's doing
mm.
really well. But he started learning mindfulness meditation because he heard that through the mindfulness meditation you can transcend pain. So he's already been practicing that in his daily life. So
Great.
for when the time comes, but you know, that's the perception. He's already assuming that he's going to be in a lot of pain. So that's kind of a danger too, isn't it?
Mhm.
So, yeah. Anyway.
Anyway, so what advice would you give to someone experiencing chronic pain, and how can they use the information in your wonderful book to improve the quality of their life?
Great question. One thing I think is to consider rewriting the story that you've built around your pain. To consider whether you do have a worrying interpretation. I think with anything in life, there are facts about our situation, and then there's the story that you build around it. And sometimes part of that could be things like, if it hurts, I'm doing more damage. You know, that might be an extreme case, but if you think every time it hurts more, you're doing more damage, then of course you're going to do less. You're going to avoid movement, and that's not going to be good for you down the track. So hopefully some of the ideas and science we give around pain in the book will help people rethink the story they build around their pain. The next piece of advice I always give people is find a pain coach, and that just means find someone who understands pain from a modern perspective, who might be able to incorporate things that improve the health of the local tissues at the site of your pain. Maybe they have some short-term strategies in their toolkit, but if they don't have some of these longer-term strategies, if they don't seem to understand that persistent pain might have some components in the body, but almost always also involves a nervous system that's become overprotective, and that you also need to factor in your mental health, then they might not be the most up-to-date person to have as a coach for you. And then, I guess to put all that together, think about what are your strategies to help you cope now, and what are the strategies that are tending to the garden so that you don't have any weeds and you're growing good fruit in a year or 2 years' time.